What happens when best friends in a legendary band suddenly become enemies? The Eagles, one of the greatest rock bands, were once as close as brothers, but then fell out with each other, even on stage. What caused this relationship to break down beyond repair? In this video, we explore the tensions between the Eagles and the truth behind the internal fighting. Find out. The breakup. The path that the bandmates of the Eagles took through the world of music is absolutely nothing short of a classic tale of achievement, which was then followed by a tragedy. It all started in 1971, when Don Henley and Glenn Frey decided to quit Linda Ronstadt's band to form a band that would eventually dominate all of the other music bands in the world. Soon after, Bernie Leadon and Randy Meisner joined the two artists in their musical endeavors. Because of this, they were able to create a one-of-a-kind blend of rock and roll and country twang with the assistance of one another. Glenn Frey and Don Henley were the band's magic ingredient, and their success was entirely dependent on their performances. Because of this, the Eagles were able to achieve success in a short period with the assistance of each other, and the world was completely prepared to experience the feeling that their music and singing brought. Let's fast forward to the year 1974, when the band decided to add another member to their already popular band by recruiting Don Felder. Felder's guitar abilities would be of great assistance to the band in expressing their emotions via their music. Everything appeared to be the ideal formula, with the music, voice, and lyrics all being in harmony with one another. Almost immediately, the hits began to dominate the world, with songs such as Take It Easy and Desperado, which dominated the charts of the music industry. The Eagles were able to effectively discover their way to perfect rhythm, and the thing that contributed to the bandstand's most essential success was their devoted fans who couldn't get enough of performing at their concerts and purchasing their new releases. Consequently, with a strong desire to make history, this very modest band eventually became one of the most successful bands in the world. The calm trip, on the other hand, was interspersed with a roller coaster ride of love, friendship, and hatred, and the bandmates of the Eagles, who are antagonistic toward one another, were brought into stark relief. Political knowledge was not something I had at all. There is no political issue that I care about. I had no idea who Alan Cranston was, and I didn't even care about him. To Felder, Senator Cranston approached him and said, "I would like to express my gratitude." Felder then turned his attention to the senator and remarked, "You are very welcome." After that, while he was walking away, he spoke the words, "I guess, I suppose so." Glenn was able to hear it. What's more, I just became incredibly angry. The members of the band started to recognize shortcomings in each other's performances as the music progressed and became more visible on the television screens. They were still able to release their album, Hotel California, in 1976, which included Felder's searing and solo guitar performance on the title track. The record was a huge success, despite all of the challenges they faced. However, even though it was a huge hit all over the world, this album also turned out to be the beginning of the band's decline. It came as a complete surprise to everyone when Felder's musical contribution to Victim of Love was abruptly stripped away. The action stoked the flames of rage inside the audience. Henley and Frey, who were formerly thought of as the band's driving influences, were made to feel suspect by their actions. Additionally, Felder, in particular, began referring to them as the gods, which was a strong indication that things were not going well. The band's tensions increased over time and eventually reached a point where they could no longer be contained. Thus, by the year 1980, a quarrel between Frey and Felder escalated into a brawl on stage when they were performing at a political fundraising dinner. To hell with you. 3 more tunes. Can you see what I'm looking at right now? I am prepared to go right now. When I finally get my hands on him, I can't wait." While the music continued to play, both parties were so enraged that they exploded in front of the audience, threatening each other. Despite this, the music continued to play. That evening was the time when the tensions that had been building up between Glenn and Felder finally manifested themselves. It is very clear that this was not only a little quarrel between the bandmates, rather, it was a foundation that was breaking. Following these appalling occurrences, every single member of the Eagles realized that their cohesiveness had been severely compromised. Even after everything that happened, they never officially parted ways with one another. Nevertheless, the kinship that had once brought them together was now broken. However, who could have predicted that 14 years later, the band would once again play with the same intensity and range? They attempt to kill the beast by stabbing it with their eyes, but they are unable to do it. During the transition from the 1980s to the 1990s, the Eagles' quiet grew increasingly audible, and the fans resumed their anticipation in the hope of seeing the epic reunion. Despite this, the members of the band continued to remain separated from one another since their wounds were still so fresh that they did not permit any of them to make amends with one another. Felder fired. However, in 2001, Felder was unexpectedly fired from the band, which caused things between the members of the band to take a new and more hostile turn. Over several years, this dismissal resulted in a judicial battle which turned the Eagles' private conflict into a public spectacle. Felder filed a lawsuit against Henley and Frey after he was fired, accusing the mayor of not only unfairly terminating his employment, but also engaging in unlawful profit-sharing arrangements. He asserted that the two individuals had insisted on obtaining a higher portion of the bank's profits, even though there had been an earlier agreement that all profits would be distributed equally among the members. This lawsuit stoked the flames of the profound animosity that had been simmering under the surface for many years. When all of the claims were taken into consideration, Henley and Frey did not take the accusations lightly. The band filed a countersuit against Felder, alleging that he had violated their contract by publishing a caustic book that revealed the band's dirty linen to the entire worldwide community. As the battle stretched on, the public grew extremely fascinated as the members of the band, who had previously had a reputation for producing lovely music, tore one another apart in court. It was in 2007, therefore, that a settlement was eventually struck, yet the specifics of the agreement remained shrouded in obscurity. Furthermore, the reality was hazy and concealed under reams of legal language and agreements that were sealed. Much like the Eagles themselves, the Eagles' music continued to resonate with people all around the world, which was a positive development, despite the numerous lawsuits and painful personal conflicts that occurred. Even though their legacy was extremely complicated, it was a collection of songs that have stood the test of time and spoke up about the perils of unbridled egos and financial disagreements. The book, Heaven and Hell, My Life in the Eagles, written by Don Felder, did an excellent job of painting a picture of a band that achieved extraordinary levels of success throughout their career. Throughout their history, the Eagles had been a rocking band that had been both harmonious and historical, and their music had reflected their common vision. On the other hand, as time progressed, this harmony was abruptly supplanted by discord. As if it were a happy ending, the Eagles were ultimately able to get back together and continue to promote themselves as one of the most successful rock bands. On the other hand, the wounds that they had sustained during their tumultuous trip lingered, serving as evidence of the cost of fame and the fragile nature of artistic partnership. Tom's passing. In addition to the members of the Eagles, several other bands took up the stage and the television screen with their open hostility toward one another throughout the show. Among these notable bands was Creedence Clearwater Revival, which is sometimes cited as being among the bands that have been the subject of the most intense dispute in the history of the globe. It is one of the most heartbreaking stories of a musical band that turned their friendship into animosity, and the story of Creedence Clearwater Revival is right up there with the best of them. The band's narrative is sometimes referred to as the most tragic period in the history of rock music. They are famous for their upbeat blues rock songs and their meteoric ascent in popularity throughout the 1960s. It was often believed that John Fogerty was the most important member of Creedence Clearwater Revival. He was the charismatic frontman of the band, and his powerful personality frequently overshadowed the other members of the band. Several successes, including Proud Mary and Bad Moon Rising, were created by his brother Tom, bassist Stu Cook, and drummer Doug Clifford together. Nevertheless, tensions began to boil under the surface from the very beginning of the situation. But why is that? The other members of the band felt envious of John because of his prominent role in both the songwriting and performing processes. Soon after, the band suffered a devastating breakup, which ended up crushing the hearts of its devoted fans who had been hoping for a great reunion up until this point. Initially, the band had a deep camaraderie that they shared. John was quite receptive to the suggestions made by the other members of the band, and the atmosphere of working together appeared to blossom. Stu Cook, however, commented on this period later on in an interview and described how, at the beginning, John was able to brighten up the feedback from his bandmates while they were performing. Nevertheless, as the band's fame increased, his influence over their music and direction got greater. He wanted to dominate and lead the band without anybody else's input. Therefore, he worked hard to achieve this goal. His growing influence was not in line with the aspirations of others, notably his brother Tom, who felt marginalized even though he was a talented songwriter in his own right. The turning point occurred in 1971, when Tom abruptly departed the band, following all of the incidents that had transpired. The leaving was a devastating blow that highlighted some of the unsolved disputes and angry feelings that had been harbored all along. Later on, John Fogerty observed that he continued to harbor feelings of animosity against his brother, even though they had not openly confronted one another at their free desire. Because of this, the members of the band eventually ceased speaking with one another. This lull in activity served as a wake-up call and marked the conclusion of their creative collaboration, which had been gradually gaining popularity among the public over several years. Following the conclusion of the event, Tom's departure ushered in a new phase of his life that was characterized by a series of legal conflicts and public conflict. Legal battles. John's original accusation against Fantasy Records was that the company had defrauded him and cheated him out of royalties. He claimed that the firm had utilized adverse contract provisions to withhold income from which he was due. John claims that he was not adequately compensated for his efforts, innovation, and hits for the band, which resulted in his being in a difficult financial situation even though his career was still considered to be at its pinnacle. To make a profit off of his reputation and skill, he said that Fantasy Records had altered the provisions of the contract to conceal the actual amount of money that he was entitled to receive from record sales. The record label Fantasy Records, on the other hand, did not maintain silence in response to these charges. The record label, on the other hand, retaliated forcefully by asserting that John was the one who owed them money. It was said by the record company that John was still bound by a contract to finish numerous albums that he had not yet finished. Because he had failed to meet this obligation, they asserted that he was legally obligated to pay them a substantial sum of money. Both parties were thrown into a stressful court struggle as a result of this, which included claims that contradicted each other and litigation that lasted for years. Moreover, the disagreements that occurred between John and Fantasy Records had a significant impact not only on his reputation, but also on the reputation of the band at this time. In the perspective of the general public, they were once a band that had successes that will go on forever, a representation of togetherness and inventiveness. On the other hand, the legal challenges transformed them into adversaries on the battlefield of greed and mistrust. Individuals who had previously worked together as colleagues, producing tunes that moved people emotionally, have suddenly turned their backs on one another and are prepared to go to court to battle for financial compensation and other perks. John's career took a turn for the worse when he was involved in legal issues, which prevented him from making significant progress with new recordings. Fans were anticipating a reunion as well as a breakthrough new record, but instead, they received news of litigation, allegations, and a future that is becoming increasingly uncertain for the band. The tensions reached a point where there was no turning back, leaving many who had previously liked the band feeling dissatisfied. Instead of working together to create a musical legacy that would last for generations, they allowed their conflicts and greed to take precedence over everything else. It is now a distant memory that promises of a lengthy career. Collaboration with others and a passion for music were made. In its current form, the band is no longer a representation of togetherness. Rather, it is a brilliant example of how money and power can ruin once solid relationships. Disintegration. An amazing musical legacy was left behind by Creedence Clearwater Revival, CCR, when they formally separated in 1972. However, this legacy was also a sad and disappointing one. Internal disagreements, particularly those that occurred between John Fogerty and the other members of the band, made it difficult for the band to retain its cohesiveness. Even though it had been one of the most popular rock bands of the late 1960s and early 1970s, the band was on the verge of dissolving due to disagreements around songwriting rights, financial interests, and managerial choices. Following the dissolution of the band, John Fogerty resumed his career as a solo artist. Despite his brilliance as a songwriter and his unusual voice, he had a great deal of difficulty. Not only did he have to cope with the enormous expectations of his fans, but he was also involved in legal concerns that were connected to his contract with Fantasy Records. He claimed that Fantasy Records had deceived him and mismanaged CCR's finances for several years. During this time, the remaining members of the band, which included Stu Cook and Doug Clifford, came together in 1995 to establish a new band that they dubbed Creedence Clearwater Revisited. Even though John, the most essential songwriter and creative spirit in the band, was no longer there, they continued to perform iconic songs from his career. This resulted in a great deal of outrage among the supporters. Many believed they had the authority to preserve the heritage of CCR, while others believed that the band could not have been without John Fogerty. If the narrative of CCR had ended with a breakup, it most likely would not have been as tragic as it was. However, John Fogerty continued to run into problems after Fantasy Records. The corporation that he had publicly denounced on several occasions filed a lawsuit against him for an odd reason. He had written music that sounded suspiciously similar to that of CCR. More specifically, in the 1980s, John Fogerty recorded a song called The Old Man Down the Road, which included a rock sound that was instantly recognizable. Fantasy Records, who at the time still owned the rights to CCR songs, filed a lawsuit against John, saying that his new song sounded too close to his previous works from when he was a member of the group. To phrase it another way, they accused John of plagiarizing his musical compositions. As a result of this litigation, it became one of the most peculiar legal cases in the history of music. John Fogerty was required to appear in court and demonstrate that he had not copied the work of others, but was rather simply adhering to his musical preferences. Although he ultimately prevailed in the litigation, this only served to solidify his animosity for Fantasy Records and to make him resentful of his time spent with CCR. There was a significant event that took place in the year 1990, even though the disagreement between John Fogerty and the other members of CCR was never completely settled. As a result of receiving a blood transfusion that was tainted with HIV, Tom Fogerty, who was John's brother and a member of CCR, became a victim of AIDS. Tom stated his wish to reconcile with his brother John as he lay dying, claiming that he had always loved John even though they had fought in the past, despite their differences. Despite this, John did not say anything. It was hard for him to forgive or go back to the past because of the pain he had throughout his years spent fighting in CCR. On September 6, 1990, Tom passed away, the burden of unresolved remorse he carried with him. As a result, the tale of CCR is not just the story of a great band, but it is also the story of a family tragedy in which two brothers became strangers due to personal problems. Creedence Clearwater Revival was given the distinction of being formally admitted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1993. This was a recognition that justified the band's significant contributions to the music industry. Nevertheless, rather than providing an opportunity for John Fogerty and the surviving members to come together and reconcile, the event served to further exacerbate the gulf that existed between them. During the event, when it was John's turn to speak, he conveyed his profound appreciation to his brother who had passed away by saying, "The first thing I would like to do is express my gratitude to Tom Fogerty. I long for him." John, on the other hand, rejected the opportunity to perform with Stu Cook and Doug Clifford, and instead chose to perform with a new group of musicians who were not affiliated with CCR. Considering that this was maybe the final opportunity for CCR to perform together on stage once more, this left a lot of fans feeling dissatisfied. However, John had already moved on from the past. He couldn't forget the pain and injustice that he had endured, and he could not pretend that everything was okay under any circumstances. When this event took place, it was officially the end of any possibility of a reunion for CCR. However, the band, along with all of the individuals who were responsible for making it happen, would never be together again, even if their music would continue to live on in the hearts of its fans. This is the tale of Creedence. In the case of Clearwater Revival, it is demonstrated that success does not necessarily equate to happiness. Differences in creative direction, greed, and disagreements over finances have the potential to bring down even the most outstanding ensembles. When one considers the circumstances behind the collapse of CCR, it is impossible not to think about other bands that have experienced comparable outcomes, such as the Brian Jonestown Massacre. In the past, the band, which was established in San Francisco in 1990 by Anton Newcomb, was praised for its rockabilly performances. Their career did not take off as quickly as they had anticipated. However, because of the internal friction that existed inside the band. Nevertheless, there is little doubt that the musical legacy of Creedence Clearwater Revival continues to be carried on. Songs like Bad Moon Rising, Have You Ever Seen the Rain, and Fortunate Son continue to reverberate in the hearts of millions of fans all over the world, as well as on the radio and in movies where they are included. During the tour of Australia that the Brian Jonestown Massacre was on in 2023, a peculiar tension suddenly became visible to the general public. The fragments, the conflict between Newcomb and the guitarist Ryan Vanner was intense, and Vanner erupted right on stage in front of millions of viewers. Newcomb was the one who was involved. "Captain, this man is looking at me like, put down my guitar, the party is over. When you finally get the chance to fuck, please stop listening to music. Your presence is not required at all," bringing about a dramatic conclusion to their tour by transforming the live performance into a place of discord with the audience. According to the allegations, the Bandmates had been carrying on a simmering quarrel with one another for several years. In addition, the documentary Dig demonstrated the antagonistic connection that existed between Newcomb and Courtney Taylor, each of whom was a member of the Dandy Warhols. It was nothing more than a public act for them to fight each other on stage in Melbourne. For a considerable amount of time, they had been harboring deep-seated grievances within their souls. Chris Robinson and Rich Robinson, who created the band known as the Black Crowes in 1984, were another band that had terrible effects as a result of their decision to divide. As a result of the sad dismissal of drummer Steve Gorman in 2001, the members of the band began to experience conflicts, which led to the beginning of a relationship that would eventually become turbulent. The passage of time was rapid, and in 2050, the conflict that had been going on between Chris and Rich became public. This resulted in their separation, which in turn caused another band to break up. During the early 1970s, Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young, a band that was regarded as a folk rock ensemble, had both a surge and a decrease in popularity. The unpredictable conduct and substance problems that David Crosby was experiencing were a cause of increasing strain. It was his problems that caused friction. By 2014, Graham Nash had made the unremarkable statement that a complete reunion was no longer possible. The primary reason for this was that Crosby had officially parted ways with the band. The untimely death of Crosby in 2023 marked the conclusion of the story, putting an end to any attempts at reconciliation that may have been possible. Nobody in the band intended the breakup to take place in such an unreconcilable manner, even though they are renowned for their unending harmonies and classics such as Bye Bye Love. The Everly Brothers were not exempt from this pandemonium. The pressure of their internal problems caused their fraternal relationship, which had been a foundational component of their success, to begin to boil over. In 1973, tensions reached a point where they culminated in a spectacular separation on stage. Because Don struggled with addiction, their harmonies left an impression that would serve as a source of inspiration for a great number of musicians. Over time, the collaboration between Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson, who were once described as the band's heart and soul, came to an end. Their vision, which had been synced in the past, began to vary significantly, particularly after Robertson decided in 1976 to break the group and pursue his fresh methods of achieving renown. The band's decision to disband was a defining moment in their history. In return, Robertson had always attempted to repair their strained connection, yet his efforts had only partially repaired the wounds that had been caused. There was no resolution to the animosity that existed between them until Helm passed away in 2012. Even though the band was going through some personal difficulties, their music continued to shine. They were able to connect their previous struggles with the enduring force of their work through the use of songs that were brimming with profound emotions and creative expression. Even if Helm and Robertson had different opinions, the legacy of their music continued to remain powerful. Everyone recalled the amazing things that they had created together as a result of this. They were able to keep their enthusiasm alive despite the challenges they were facing by performing strong songs that demonstrated their common potential. But whatever these stories may be, one thing we cannot deny is their great musical legacy. The Eagles' legacy. The Eagles were formed in 1971 in Los Angeles by Glenn Frey, Don Henley, Bernie Leadon, and Randy Meisner. From the very beginning, the band developed a distinctive style, blending rock, country, and folk, creating a smooth yet deep sound. Their debut album, Eagles, 1972, quickly established their name with hits such as Take It Easy and Peaceful Easy Feeling. The Eagles' music evoked images of the endless roads of the American West, bringing a sense of freedom and nostalgia. With their refined vocal harmonies and skillful playing, they attracted the attention of the public and critics from the early years of their career. In the mid-1970s, the Eagles entered their golden age with consecutive successful albums. Desperado, 73, brought the color of the Wild West, with the title song becoming one of their iconic songs. However, it was with One of These Nights, 1975, that the band truly reached their peak. The album yielded hits like Lion Eyes, Take It to the Limit, and the title track, which earned them their first Grammy. In 1976, the Eagles released Hotel California, an iconic album that is widely considered the masterpiece of their career. The title track, Hotel California, with its legendary guitar solos by Don Felder and Joe Walsh, has become one of the greatest songs in rock history. Its metaphorical lyrics, reflecting the glamour and emptiness of the American dream, have made it a classic that has been analyzed and praised for decades. At the same time, the Eagles released their Greatest Hits, 1971-70, a greatest hits album. Not only was the album widely acclaimed, but it also became one of the best-selling albums of all time, with sales of over 38 million copies in the US. This huge success established the Eagles as one of the world's greatest rock bands. However, great success also came with tremendous pressure. Internal tensions between the members increased, especially between Glenn Frey and Don Felder. After releasing The Long Run, 1979, their final album before the breakup, the Eagles officially broke up in 1980 after a series of irreconcilable conflicts. Throughout the 1980s, the members pursued solo careers. Don Henley and Glenn Frey achieved great success on their own with hits such as The Boys of Summer, Henley, and The Heat Is On, Frey. However, fans always hoped for a reunion. In 1994, the seemingly impossible happened. The Eagles officially reunited with the album Hell Freezes Over, named after Don Henley's previous joke that the group would only reunite when hell freezes over. The album featured re-recorded hits along with new songs like Get Over It and Love Will Keep Us Alive. Since then, the Eagles have continued to tour and maintain their position. In 2007, they released Long Road Out of Eden, their first studio album in 28 years, proving that they still have a strong following. In 2016, Glenn Frey, the co-founder and soul of the Eagles, passed away, leaving a huge void in the hearts of fans. However, the band decided to continue with the participation of his son, Deacon Frey, along with Vince Gill, a veteran country artist. The Eagles continue to tour, bringing their music to new generations of audiences. Their timeless songs are still played on the radio, featured in movies and TV shows, and continue to inspire future artists. The Eagles are more than just a rock band. They are an integral part of American popular culture. Their music connects people with the most raw emotions, from the desire for freedom to nostalgia to deep reflections on life. From the dusty roads of the West to the bright lights of Los Angeles, the Eagles tell stories that everyone can relate to. As time passes, their legacy lives on as an eternal icon of music. The stories of these legendary bands provide light on the intricate and frequently excruciating relationships that led to their levels of success. What do you guys think about the extent of the enmity that exists amongst members of the same bands? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. We would love to hear from you. And don't forget